If you were to ask me what I consider to be the best stories ever told in games, I'd probably say Silent Hill 2, Metal Gear Solid 2, Disco Elysium, Final Fantasy VII, Red Dead Redemption, Fallout New Vegas, and Devil May Cry 3.
Now, I can already hear y'all rushing into the comments section wondering how I, a no-name video essayist recommended to you through the whims of a pernicious algorithm, could have such an opinion. I get it. It's a hot take.
But I'm willing to bet that if you, the average enjoyer of a gaming video essay, know anything about Devil May Cry 3, it's probably just that it's a very good action game. A sort of Bayonetta-type game. A game with a strict focus on in-depth and execution-heavy combat, and there's even a style meter for Pete's sake. A sort of memeable Metal Gear Rising type thing with a silly, uber-cool but kind of stupid story. An action game where you play a character.
And Devil May Cry 3 is those things. It's inescapably campy and goofy, but it's not despite those qualities that it's one of the best stories told in games. It's because of them.
The third game in the series, Devil May Cry 3 is the fan favorite of the franchise, arguably the best game in the series until greatest game of all time, Devil May Cry 5 was released.
Look, it's just true. I mean, this is one of the best games ever made.
But if there's one thing I have to give Devil May Cry 3, it's that it has one of the best executed upon stories, not just in the series, but in all of gaming. And executed is the operative word here. The execution of all its camp, all of its bombast, all of its style and flourish and mood, being what makes this one of the best told stories in all of gaming. It's a story dense with thematic imagery, a meticulously plotted set of levels doling out a deliciously camp, fist-pumpingly epic tale of brotherhood, bloodlines, revenge, power, and what it takes to grab a hold of your life and take that bitch for a ride. And that expertly told narrative starts the moment you start a new game. Long ago, the legendary devil Sparda betrayed his demonic brethren in order to seal them away from the earth, condemning them all to an eternity in hell and forsaking his own demonic power. The demons and evil lovers of the world did not appreciate this. Sparda's humanitarian bent spurred by his love of a human woman, Ava, with whom he had twin sons, Dante and Virgil. And as the game begins, and an unseen female narrator explains this story to us, we see those two brothers at war with one another. A balletic, perfectly choreographed fight scene playing out with all the style and panache of the very best cinematic action has to offer. For 2005, this is mind-blowing animation and rendering, and even today, its timeless cinematic qualities keep it just as engaging. The way this massive moon hangs over the scene, our only indication of what's even happening being the ringing of steel against steel, the voiceover uttering the first line of the game. A question.
You've heard of it, haven't you? The Legend of Sparda?
Immediately, this frames the central conflict of the story as something larger than life, as something so important to the fabric of this world that asking someone if they've heard of it is posed as a hypothetical. You've heard of it, haven't you? If you haven't, you'll want to listen up. These are the first seconds of DMC3, already composed of such visual, auditory, and written qualities as could fill, well, this entire paragraph. Slow-motion anime Bishonen, one red, one blue, fighting so ferociously on a moonlit night that the swinging of their swords impedes the fall of the rain around them. The scene cutting from close-up to wide angle to matrix slow-mo with just as much speed, ferocity, and precision. The tale being told is a deceptively simple one, immediately setting up our protagonist and antagonist, locking them in an easily readable conflict, a conflict that we see as the very first image of the game. The context of the story really is set dressing for all the action. Or is it? It's archetypal in nature, but it's what the story needs at first to get you hooked. we open on these two mysterious individuals, duking it out in the rain, their color coding and choice of weapons immediately signaling to us, subconsciously, who's who and what they could be fighting for. The victor of the fight taking a moment to brush his hair back from his face, further distinguishing himself from his defeated twin as the more composed and calculating of the two. We see the fallen twin begin to move from the ground before the other turns around, plunging a sword into his body, and then we cut to black. This has been an analysis of the first exactly 2 minutes of DMC3's story. All of it rendered with such clarity of vision, it's impossible not to be drawn into this world. It's grandiose and operatic, theatrical in presentation and intent, and all of it coming together to create one of the most iconic openings to any game. An opening that only serves to raise questions. Who are these dueling twins? Why are they fighting? Who is the woman recounting for us the legend of Sparta and her encounter with these two? Where is this fight happening? What happens to the red twin? All of these questions, raised by the first moments of the game, will be expanded on to create the story of Devil May Cry 3. And then the game actually begins.
Now, I think the best way for me to make my point would be to break down for you the game's first 7 missions. Devil May Cry 3 follows a mission-based structure, the game evenly segmented into 20 missions, which last a skilled player anywhere from 3 to 20 minutes of gameplay, bookended by cutscenes. This structure allows the developers to perfectly dole out its story, metering its progress as it follows a perfectly paced and plotted 3-act structure. Now, for now, we're just going to focus on the first 7 of these missions, which constitute the game's first arc, wherein the game introduces all of its characters and their motivations, sets the stakes, mounts guns above mantles, and introduces all of its gameplay mechanics. And we begin with Mission 1.
Mission 1 starts with Dante, our red-clad protagonist, alive and well, immediately framing the game's introduction as a visage of things to come. And boy is he ever alive and well, chomping down on pizza while lazing around the office of his as of yet unopened business. He hasn't even picked a name yet, and already he's getting calls. But it's not long before Dante's peace is interrupted by this obviously evil man with an obviously evil facial scar, tattoo, parasite thing, who asks,
"Is your name Dante, son of Sparta?"
His eyes resting on an amulet around Dante's neck, before cutting to a reverse close-up of his eyes, one red, the other blue. And immediately, we're back to the iconography of the opening cinematic. Not a cutscene in this game will waste a moment or a line to reinforce its already established themes and narrative threads, and it's something that's noted within the first minutes of the game. We've yet to pick up a controller, we've yet to learn how to do a pause combo, we've only just heard Dante's name spoken aloud for the first time. The evil man tells Dante that he's here carrying an invitation at the behest of Dante's brother. The evil man flips Dante's desk, tossing his pizza in the air, which he then perfectly catches with his left hand as the pizza box falls back down, but not before doing a 360 somersault backflip, catching first with his right hand a pistol. If in the introduction cutscene, we were introduced to Dante's sword, the massive Claymore Rebellion, through the context of the fight against Virgil and his katana, then it's the pistol, introduced in a scene where Dante does what I can only describe as Napoli foo, that rounds out the complete thematic introduction of Dante as a character.
Shortly after this, demons show up, who Dante fights off stylishly using improvised weapons, which include a ceiling fan, their own sides impaled into his body, the body of a demon who he rides around like a skateboard, pool balls, and a pool table.
Don't bet on it. Immediately, we know who this character is. And he's a bit of a contradiction. At once cool and commanding, strong enough to wield a massive sword like a hero out of time, yet modern enough to also wield the akimbo pistols Ebony and Ivory. There's a tension, already, in the game's narrative, between an epic fight on a rain-soaked night and a man humiliating tiny Grim Reapers while a slice of pizza dangles from his mouth. It's beautiful. And it's only mission 1.
This is gonna be one hell of a party!
Mission 2 is a short one, cinematically much shorter than the first, but it continues the thread of recounting the game's inciting incident. We see Dante emerge from his now wrecked shop, put the herd on some more demons, and then square off against the game's first boss, the Hell Vanguard. Frightening and imposing, the Hell Vanguard is a giant Grim Reaper wielding an equally massive scythe that will make short work of unskilled players. It's the game's first of many skill checks, a tough enemy to style on perfectly, its scythe being easily parried by Dante's sword swings if timed just so, the first parry always landing if a player begins to attack around the first opening the Vanguard gives them, signaling to the player that their style will also require a degree of finesse. To kill the Vanguard is no real feat. To do so flawlessly is commendable. However, the mission ends when, abruptly, the fight against the Vanguard is interrupted by a massive tower erupting from the earth. It's a beautiful sight, the foreboding, megalithic structure rising violently, as if of its own crazed volition, its scale compared to the city around it nearly impossible to comprehend. The Vanguard leaves in the direction of the tower, as if summoned by its master, the shot resting long enough on the distant spire for us to catch a glimpse of a giant whale flying around its walls. And to top it all is Virgil. Mission 3 opens on the first real cutscene to feature Virgil, the camera taking an omniscient bent as we watch a scene play out between him and his mysterious lackey, Arkham. Their conversation is brief, contextualizing the amulets as having some mysterious power. And then, last mission's boss, the formidable and frightening Hell Vanguard, arrives back at the top of the tower, the Temmen Nigru, at the behest of its master, groveling at Virgil's feet after its defeat by Dante. And Virgil rends the Reaper in two with one clean slice of his katana. This is the power vacuum between you and Virgil, a man you know you'll have to face at some point in the future, a man you know will defeat you. Already the central conflict of the game has come full circle, given all the narrative recontextualization it needs to land that much harder. The bisected skeleton then falls down the length of the tower in this phenomenally composed shot, the scene then cutting to a panning shot from street level, where we're introduced to a woman atop a motorcycle, her sights set on the tower as well, her voice recognizable as the woman who narrates the introduction, before she speeds away, burning a group of demons with her exhaust, causing their bodies to fall to the ground in the shape of a numeral 3?
Wait, like the mission we're on? Has the game been doing this? Alright, so a quick tangent on the numbers in the cutscenes. Up till now, I've been going over each of these scenes, poring over their narrative details and cinematic construction, and I can already hear the curtains are just blue crowd coming out of the woodwork, but this little numeric detail is more or less the only proof I need to prove that none of this is a coincidence.
Each of Devil May Cry 3's 20 missions' first cutscene carries within it a visual Easter egg, sometimes overt, sometimes very easy to miss, of the number of the mission the cutscene plays in somewhere in its mise-en-scène. From flaming skeletons, to scratched Roman numerals, to the numeric millimeter of a spent cartridge, these Easter eggs are a funny and cheeky invitation by the developers to observant players, asking them to look a little closer, to understand that they understand what it is they're making here, and that they're making it with care and attention. It's perhaps no coincidence then that the game's third mission has one of the more overt number Easter eggs, but we'll get to that.
Anyway, back to the show.
Compared to the first two missions, Mission 3 could fill an entire essay by itself. a dense, interconnected series of 6 stages, 3 times as big as the previous 2 missions that came before it. Dante traversing a few city blocks, mostly within the interior of a bar and a cabaret club, before emerging at the foot of the Evil Tower. It's the first real chance players get to move from scene to scene, freely exploring the selection of levels on offer within the mission, Dante acquiring a shotgun in the bar, his first real upgrade. To get hyper-specific for a moment, the tension present within this game is made even more apparent here, between the ultra-masculine bar and the slightly more effeminate, theatrical club you wind up in. It's the kind of tension DMC3 has been playing with the entire time, between the ultra-serious and gritty, and the more camp and fun side of its personality. This is a bit of a reckoning for the series' identity, something we'll talk about in a bit, but it's neat that we can see it represented so many times within the game's first 3 missions, and in some of the more minute choices of its design and planning. Surprised to say the folks over at Capcom knew what they were doing. You fight your way to the end of Mission 3, and 2 very important things happen. You reach the foot of the Evil Tower, the Temene grew. The space will remain within for the rest of the game, and within, Dante fights the game's first boss, Cerberus. And this big 3-headed mutt immediately wants to make something clear to you. You, a mortal, are powerless, and are therefore not worthy to set foot here.
Put down the controller. Give up. You don't have the fucking juice.
Prove him wrong. Cerberus is a filter, the game's first real difficult encounter, difficult enough for me, someone who loves these games but hasn't played 3 in nearly a decade, to struggle a bit with it given Dante's limited kit at the start of the game. It's a fight that requires you to utilize every mechanical trick you've picked up on to this point. And what a riveting fight it is. Dodging icicles, blasting away his ice shield, focusing on his legs so he drops his vulnerable heads to the ground, a perfect opportunity for you to begin to flex some of those sexy combos you've been picking up. It's world-class stuff. Once the fight has been won, once you've locked in and proved your worth, then something transcendent occurs. The Cerberus acknowledges your might, asking if you truly can be human. Dante doesn't know. Do you know what you're capable of? Cerberus then gives you its blessing, granting you its soul in the form of ice nunchucks, the first new devil arm you acquire. Cerberus acknowledges Dante's power and willingly joins him as an ally, becoming a new weapon for him to wield. Dante's shoes are massive, waiting for you to fill them in. He's cool and stylish and badass and goofy, but the story of Devil May Cry 3 is all about him unlocking his true potential. You start the game off relatively weak, your various styles needing to be leveled up through use, your armaments limited to his trusty sword Rebellion, and the classic akimbo pistols Ebony and Ivory, much like in the first Devil May Cry. But while the original DMC doled out its upgrades and new weapons somewhat ungracefully, unlocking a new weapon or gun being simply a question of stumbling upon the weapon in question with a hyper-cool but narratively kind of arbitrary cutscene, DMC 3 grounds the acquisition not just as an integral part of its story and lore, but as integral to Dante's development as a character. It's a complete recontextualization of what it even means to acquire a new devil arm.
If there's one thing we've been talking a lot of, it's about Devil May Cry 3 contextualizing and recontextualizing information. And an important thing to understand about Devil May Cry 3 is that, despite being the 3rd game in the series, the end of the original trilogy of PS2 games, it's chronologically the first game in the timeline.
Originally spun off from the long, troubled development of Resident Evil 4, the original Devil May Cry is a game that was arrived at somewhat unintentionally. Owing to the smashing success of the more action-focused Resident Evil 2, game director Hideki Kamiya was given carte blanche to create his own unique vision for Resident Evil 3, a process that lasted so long it soon became Resident Evil 4. Kamiya's vision for this new Resident Evil game would triple and quadruple down on the level of action, focusing its story around an uber-cool protagonist named Tony with a mysteriously powerful body due to some new form of biotech. Just in line enough with the concepts of Resident Evil and its evil umbrella pharmaceutical company, but just weird enough that Kamiya decided his concept for an action-packed RE game starring a man with a magically enhanced body should just be its own thing instead of being the next entry in Capcom's flagship survival horror franchise. But by this point in development, so many of RE4's assets had been developed that, rather than scrapping it all, they built this new title on the bones of what they'd created for RE4. Add in the fortunate discovery of a bug in Onimusha, another Capcom title developed in tandem with RE4 that allowed players to juggle enemies in the air, and the concept for Devil May Cry was born. It's, to this day, perhaps the most pure distillation of Kamiya's style as a designer and director. A flashy, cool, action-heavy game, mechanically a marvel, historically beyond significant, but narratively a bit sloppy and random. Like Kamiya tossed into a blender a mix of things he thought were cool with things he was obligated to include due to how much cost Capcom had already sunk into the project. It's a miracle it works. After DMC1 though, Capcom was in a bit of a pickle. And by a bit of a pickle, I mean the money-grubbing, production-heavy process of the mid-90s to early 2000s, spurred on by the massive success of Resident Evil 2, a cash cow so large it necessitated the company burning itself out upon the release of RE4, having just released game after game after game, finally caught up with them. With the internal success of Devil May Cry, higher-ups at Capcom smelled money, and development on a sequel began before the release of the original game, under the production of a different internal team within Capcom, composed of mostly newer developers and older staff who had previously only worked on arcade titles. The reasons for this are many, perhaps too many to get into without just making an entirely separate video on the subject, so suffice to say that this new team of devs, now dubbed Team Devil, was floundering at deciding upon what exactly a Devil May Cry 2 should be. The previous game had been a miracle, arrived at nearly by chance, so how would a development team even begin to make another one of these games intentionally? A story had been written, concepts had been played with, but Team Devil director Noritaka Funamizu had given the team too little actual direction, giving them the creative freedom to do what they wanted, but not setting up guide rails in order to ensure the game got made on time. Enter Hideaki Itsuno. Having worked on some of the greatest fighting games from Capcom's heyday in the 90s and early 2000s, such as Capcom vs. SNK 2 and Rival Schools, by 2003, Hideaki Itsuno was a seasoned planner and director with a track record of releasing quality games on time. So naturally, he was the perfect choice for Capcom higher-ups to bring into the fold of Team Devil, who at this point were 6 months from their deadline of finishing the game, and had yet to plan out a scenario for the game, or animate cutscenes, and were still struggling to figure out what to even do about Dante's signature move, the Devil Trigger. They desperately needed help. To say that Team Devil, under the new direction of Itsuno, barely pulled it off would be a bit of a stretch. The game that released as Devil May Cry 2 being panned by critics and gamers alike, a catastrophe for Capcom. But Itsuno, one of the most talented, promising directors within Capcom, wasn't done. And neither were the rest of Team Devil, who had literally shed blood, sweat, and tears to get Devil May Cry 2 out the door. The failure of Devil May Cry 2 would not be their legacy. Not by a long shot. So they asked for a second chance, and in another miracle, they got it. With Itsuno at the helm, and a now bloodthirsty staff of developers at Team Devil at his back, the conceptualization and development of Devil May Cry 3 became something as symbolic as it was an actual factual event. Capitalizing on every misstep of DMC2, From its emotionless older Dante, to its painfully easy difficulty, to its cobbled together scenario, DMC3 rights every wrong committed by DMC2, resetting the clock on its story and going back to basics. But it wasn't enough to just fix prior mistakes. If DMC3 was going to succeed as a game, if it was going to succeed as a worthy successor to what Kamiya and his team accomplished with DMC1, despite its own long, tumultuous development time, then Team Devil had to ask, what could a Devil May Cry game look like if it was developed efficiently and intentionally, with a full understanding of what the series was and meant? What if a new Devil May Cry game could push every aspect of the series past the highs set by Kamiya and create a new identity for the series?
Wait, what was I supposed to be talking about? Mission 3 sees Dante finally meet the mystery motorcycle lady who shoots a missile at him. He matrix dodges, jumps on top of, and then rides around like a hoverboard.
Upon landing, though, Dante, and by extension the audience, is finally able to get a good look at her face, the camera holding just long enough on her heterochromatic eyes to remind us that we've seen this all somewhere before. But just like that, she's gone, and Dante enters the Tema Nigru, his twin awaiting him somewhere at the top. So ends the first 3 missions of Devil May Cry 3, and with it, the first act begins in full, these first 3 missions serving as their own mini-arc. Within these first 3 missions, we're introduced to nearly every major player in the game's story, and during the brief periods of time we spend with each character, we come to understand not just who they are and their motivations, but also what their relationships are to each other. But on top of the incredibly efficient, iconic storytelling, with these first 3 missions, we start to form an understanding of what it is that Team Devil intended for Devil May Cry 3 to be. The overt Mission 3 number Easter egg clearly signaling to players that they should be looking closer. That unlike the first 2 Devil May Cry games, the story on offer here, and all its little details and stylistic flourishes, are worth paying attention to. Everything here is a carefully considered choice. And we're only on Mission 3. Mission 4 sees us finally within the walls of the tower, the Tema Nigru, the introduction cutscene seeing us back with Virgil and Arkham, the 2 of them musing about the mysterious woman who has entered the tower alongside Dante, Arkham letting us know that he's acquainted with that woman, before walking out of the scene while muttering about an approaching storm. It's a simple, expository scene, but after the narrative and gameplay roller coaster of Mission 3, some breathing room is appreciated, and that lulling sense of respite extends to the gameplay of Mission 4, our introduction to the Tema Nigru coming in the form of a mission centered around scaling a very tall room. We get a moment to explore, to take in the vibe of this space, to fight some enemies and do some light puzzle solving, the memory of Grandpa Resident Evil skulking in the shadows. It's a fairly rudimentary level, culminating in my least favorite boss in the game, the minor demon Gigapede, who grants no weapon. And the less said about that boring piece of shit, the better. But what we do get at the end of Mission 4 is the introduction of Jester, who is a jester. Just a silly little guy who cracks jokes and is really campy and fun. And
Definitely isn't another thematic clue as to the point of the entire game.
Mission 5 is a long one, so to keep things brief, we'll just say that it features the first fight against Jester, a recurring boss fight we'll experience 2 more times over the course of the game, a trek back through the base of the tower to acquire the Soul of Steel, an item necessary to cross over a giant pit, which culminates in the next fight against a weapon-giving boss, the twin demon swords, Agni and Rudra.
The fight against Agni and Rudra is one of my favorites in the game. A difficult encounter against not 1, but 2 deadly opponents, requiring skill and strategy in order to take down effectively. But Agni and Rudra are also narratively emblematic, not just to the themes and iconography DMC3 keeps beating you over the head with, but of the potential folkloric allusions to and sources of that iconography.
Long ago, there lived near a village of humans a red Oni. But the red Oni was a kind and jolly sort, and wanted more than anything to make friends with the people of the village. So he put up signs near his house, inviting everyone in the village to a large party at his place. But when the day of the party arrived, no one came, leaving the red Oni sad and alone. The red Oni didn't understand why no one came to his party, so he asked his friend, the blue Oni, for advice. The blue Oni told him that the humans were afraid of him, and if he was to make friends with them, then they would have to do something to make them not be afraid of him anymore. They set about forming a plan. One day, the people of the village awoke in a fright as they discovered their village was being attacked by a blue Oni. But then, out of nowhere, their savior arrived. The red Oni burst forth from the forest, doing battle with the blue Oni, chasing him away and saving the people in their village from destruction. The Oni's plan had gone off without a hitch. From that day forward, the people of the village and the red Oni lived together as friends. The people coming to realize just how sweet and loving the red Oni was, despite his appearance and strength. The red Oni had gotten his wish, and was so happy he had to thank his friend the blue Oni for all the help he had given him. So he went over to his house one day to thank him, only to discover that the house was empty. The blue Oni was nowhere to be found. The red Oni looked all over, and just as he was about to give up looking, he found a letter addressed to him. "My apologies for leaving on such short notice," read the letter, "and my congratulations on all your new friends. Yet if anyone finds out that you and I are friends, then you will lose all that we worked so hard for you to have. Enjoy your new life. Your friend, Blue Oni." Well, that was fucking weird. Anyway, alright, let me level with y'all real quick. Mission 6 is a bit dull. The only real narrative we get in this mission coming from its opening and ending cutscenes being focused around the mystery woman, who let's just call Lady. Dante calls her that later in the game, and that becomes her name for the rest of the series. Look, there's a lot we can't get into. The opening cutscene is once again another brilliantly animated and directed fight scene, but it's the mission's final cutscene that carries the narrative payload, seeing Lady face to face at last with Arkham, who's revealed to be her father. Now, eagle-eyed gamers would have already caught on to this fact, but what it does, here before the final push towards the grand finale of the game's first act, is drive home the importance of the theme of family in Devil May Cry 3. Regardless, the actual meat of the mission on offer here doesn't amount to much, the mission being a series of 3 trials that really aren't— oh, who am I kidding? Buckle up! The meat of Mission 6, the final mission before the grand finale of Act 1, is all about completing 3 trials, the completion of each trial offering Dante an essence he'll need to progress through the mission. The Trial of Wisdom, which involves solving a pretty simple what crawls on 4 feet, then 2, then 3 type riddle. The Trial of Technique, an obstacle course where you'll dodge incoming spikes while trying to reach the end of a corridor. And the Trial of the Warrior, where you'll face off against a gauntlet of enemies. The instructional plaque for the trial stating, "Passing 1 trial still shows lacking. Passing 2 trials expands horizons. Passing all trials unlocks one's true potential." Now, once all of the essences have been gathered, they must be offered to the goddess, put in this machine that'll trigger a laser to shoot some rocks and open a door. But there's thematic significance even here in how this all relates to the game's combat and Dante's journey so far. The essence of fighting is placed first, but this alone is not enough of an offering to the goddess to do anything. Nothing happens when it's placed in the machine. The essence of technique is next, powering the machine and blasting away the rocks that stand in Dante's way. But if the player inserts the essence of intelligence, only then does the machine fulfill its true function. offering up the laser gun Artemis for Dante, having finally proved himself worthy. See, even in its puzzles and item descriptions and scenario design, Team Devil was doing something. The passing of 3 trials already an archetypal piece of storytelling, but using that structure to comment on the journey newer players are making, harnessing their own prowess, technical ability, and intelligence to understand all of the game's systems, and all of that given space to exist in the in-universe text of the game, that's effective games writing.
With Mission 6 completed, and only 1 left to go in this analysis, how will DMC3 pull it all together? How will it pay off on what it and I have been hyping up?
Taking it from the top, Mission 7 begins with Dante rescuing Lady after the events of the previous mission, where she's thrown off the tower by her father, Arkham. Lady then shoots Dante in the head, learning for a fact that he is a demon, so she continues to attempt to shoot him, Dante snarking off before dipping a bloodied finger into the open wound on his forehead, and then wiping the blood off on the wall next to him, the blood dripping to form a number 7. And then, before the mission even begins, we see what we're in for. Prior to every mission, there's a screen where we see the number of the mission, its name, and a subtitle, accompanied by an image foreshadowing things to come. The screen exists as a chance for players to exchange the blurbs they've picked up or have been awarded at the end of each mission for new techniques for their weapons, extra damage for guns, or items they can use to heal or increase their power. Each stage has one of these screens, so when the one for Mission 7 pops up, and we see that monolithic moon hanging above that iconic, foreboding precipice, we know immediately where we are and what lies in front of us. As a level, Mission 7 is a masterclass of design and pacing, seeing us now fully able to descend and ascend the length of the tower in a quest to find the key to this door, along the way fighting new enemies, and even squaring off against another Hell's Vanguard, the first boss fight of the game, now presented as just a regular enemy. The level and encounter design, in this way, comes full circle, forcing us to employ every trick we've picked up on up to this point, old bosses remade as regular combatants, alongside new enemies with new unique mechanics, several missions worth of puzzle and level design culminating in a simple yet expansive quest to acquire a key to open a door. And then you open the door. We're outside now. The red blorb crystal at once reminding us that this is the spot where Virgil and Arkham sat a few missions prior, upon our first entry into the Tema Negru. They're gone now. All that remains is this item store statue, one we've by now come to associate with an approaching boss fight, and yet another door. So we go through that door. Rain starts falling. We ascend a ramp towards Virgil, climbing now hundreds of feet above the city below, the gothic, cyclopean rise of the Tema Negru leading us towards this fated confrontation, as inescapable as the moon that hangs above it all. We enter the arena.
You showed up.
You sure know how to throw a party. No food, no drinks, and the only babe just left.
My sincerest apology, brother. I was so eager to see you, I couldn't concentrate on preparations for the bash.
Whatever. At any rate, it's been a whole year since we last met. How about a kiss from your little brother? Or better yet, how about a kiss from this? So, this is what they call a heartwarming family reunion, eh?
got that right.
The fight against Virgil at the end of Mission 7 of Devil May Cry 3 is, perhaps, one of the best written and directed sequences in any video game. A perfect example of cinematic anticipation leading to gameplay payoff. The fight itself is electric, a deadly and brutal test that asks everything of first-time players. Virgil's clean, quick, and efficient katana slices landing with a strength unlike anything players have faced off against to this point. He leaves little opening, requiring you to not just observe his attack patterns and dodge the relentless onslaught of his attacks, but carve out openings within his patterns for yourself. Because despite how deadly he is, despite how much narrative time has been spent hyping up how strong he is, Virgil is your twin. And if he can hit you with it, then you can hit back. And that's the key to figuring out this fight. You're no more or less powerful than Virgil. He can be stunned the same way you can. You can be just as fast as him, just as dangerous. And look, his hair's falling down, just like in the cutscene. You beat Virgil, but it still wasn't enough. There's just something he can tap into. Some special sauce he has that you just don't. Despite his morally questionable actions and motivations, he's right about one thing. Without power, you can't protect anything. Not even yourself. This is the dispute that has spurred these two brothers to conflict against one another, and all of it a question of what to do with the inescapable fact that they are the only living descendants of the legendary demon Sparda. What do you do with that responsibility? How do you seize that power? How do you confront that history and do what's right? Dante falls, impaled by his own sword, and then all these trials, these encounters against demons that acknowledge his innate potential and lineage, this story about seizing your own power, about reckoning with your bloodline, about the tension between all the contradictory parts of ourselves, it catches back up to him. And Dante unlocks the final mechanical piece of the pie, his devil trigger. So ends the 7th mission, concluding the first act of Devil May Cry 3, the game then beginning properly. We're off the deep end now narratively, coming full circle on the very first moments of the game. It's all built up to this, and the game still has so much left to show. But I'm gonna stop there. I hope by now you've come to understand why I hold the storytelling in this game in such high regard. It's a dumb, fun action game, sure, but it's also so much more than that, taking simple themes and character motivations and expertly weaving them into a perfectly paced, addictingly engrossing tale, its entire thesis statement laid out for players as the game builds up to the first of 3 climactic encounters with Virgil, an encounter promised to players the second they press play. And that's the thing about Devil May Cry 3, the thing I think elevates it beyond just a greatest of all time action game into the territory of greatest games of all time, period. It makes good on all of its promises. I can't get into everything. Believe me, I'd love to keep talking about Lady and how her side of the story reinforces and gels perfectly with Dante and Virgil's backstory, or how Jester and the reveal of his motives has everything to do not just with the conceit of the game's themes, but the color of his outfit, to the shape of his stupid hat, to his connection to these light puzzles we encounter throughout the game, and how it all relates to the dichotomy between DMC1 and DMC2, or about why I took a moment in the middle of this video to recount for you a traditional Japanese children's story. There's just not enough time. And frankly, if by now you haven't been convinced to humor me on this one, to replay DMC3 with fresh eyes, or to play it for the first time yourself, then I think I've failed. I can only give you so many answers. What I can give you, though, are tools. Tools you can use to see what the developers intended for this game, to appreciate the finer details of its themes and motifs, and to see for yourself what awaits Dante beyond the summit of the tower, beyond the game's introductory cutscene. If you've never played DMC3 before, if it's your first Devil May Cry game, period, then go forth.
I leave you with this last tidbit, though. One final galaxy-brained observation that ties everything together.
Earlier in the video, we talked about how, with the defeat of Cerberus, DMC3 took an aspect of DMC 1 and 2's design, the acquisition of new weapons over the course of the journey, and gave it narrative and thematic context. And with that, we have an example of what Itsuno and Team Devil intended to do with DMC3. Not just making a competent boss fight requiring actual skill to defeat like the encounters of the first DMC, but taking an aspect of the original, the at times random and contextually arbitrary way Dante acquires new weapons, and narratively grounding each of the different weapons that Dante acquires as the souls of the bosses he defeats throughout his journey, each of them so persuaded by his worthiness as the heir of Sparda that they pledged their very souls to him. This isn't the only thing changed by Itsuno & Co., but it's the most immediately emblematic of the kinds of changes that they were striving to make over the DMC formula with DMC3. That sense of worthiness, of finally amounting to the heights of your predecessor, becoming one of the main themes of the game. And that, in a microcosm, is why DMC3 is one of the greatest stories ever told in games. It's something so simple, so elemental to storytelling, that it's almost unremarkable, something we might otherwise take for granted. But for the developers at Team Devil, everything was riding on the line. Nothing could be left to chance. No stone could be left unturned, no narrative thread left to dangle nebulously over a pit from which ring a chorus of voices, chanting, "But it's just a stupid action game." Team Devil believed in something, and they knew that they'd probably never get another chance to prove to the world that, like Dante, they could measure up to the strength of their forebears, and maybe even give them a run for their money. 20 years ago, Hideaki Itsuno and the rest of Team Devil set out not just to right the wrongs of Devil May Cry 2 by making a competent action game, they set about to create a masterpiece that surpassed the work of a legend. And they succeeded in their effort, crafting a game that practically screams not just of quality, but of care and attention and specificity. And all of that weight of expectation, of the grueling hours poured into trying to save a doomed project, and then given a second chance to get it right, to revel in all the idiosyncrasies of its nature, written into the very fabric of its story. Want to know the name?
Devil May Cry.
Hey everyone, hope y'all enjoyed watching the video. Obviously, DMC3 is a game that's really close to my heart, so I hope it's apparent just how much I care for this game and this series. If you haven't played DMC3, then what are you doing? Stop! Go! I really hope this video kicks things off right this year. This will be my first year trying out this whole YouTube thing. I have a lot of ideas for videos, hopefully releasing monthly, starting with this one. Other than that, please take care of yourselves. Shit's real bleak right now, so do what you can for yourself and for those around you. You have it within you to do what it takes. I promise. Bye!